Hey guys, welcome to the second lecture of CSE 4635. In this video, we will be taking a look at the statelessness of HTTP. We'll be taking a look at session ID, and finally, we will take a look at how cookies work. So let's get right to it. So what exactly is the statelessness of an HTTP connection? You see, whenever a client makes a request to the server, and the server fulfills that request by sending a response message back to the client, that connection is closed. Any information that is related to the request message or the response message are not stored anywhere. So what happens is any new request that the client makes to the server, that request is not aware of any past requests. Similarly, the server, when serving those requests, is not aware of any previous requests that it has served. Okay? So essentially, all the requests that are made by a client are separate entities that are different from each other. This is basically what is known as the statelessness of an HTTP connection. It has some obvious benefits to it. For example, web developers do not have to worry about additional storage management options whenever they are developing their applications because none of the information needs to be stored anywhere, right? However, this has some glaring disadvantages to it as well. So the main disadvantage to this is the fact that no information is stored about a particular user session. So for example, after we initially log into Facebook, imagine having to log in for every single action that we perform. For example, we can hit the love react to a post, we can watch an image, or we can watch a video, or we can listen to a music on Facebook. But imagine having to log in for each of these actions. Because theoretically, since each of these actions is a separate request that the client is making to the server, we should have had to log in for each of these actions, right? But that does not really happen though, does it? We are not suddenly logged out of our session whenever we are watching a video. Instead, what happens is the server for each of these requests sends back an HTML web page to us, which basically knows that it is us and shows us information related to our own user profile. So how does this happen? You see, web developers employ various techniques to simulate stateful experiences when it comes to web applications like this. So for example, when we are navigating through the internet and visit similar websites like Twitter or Instagram, we see that our username is present at the top of the screen, which basically signifies that we have been authenticated once by the server, and we don't have to re-log in every time whenever we perform any little action. Remember, these little actions translate to new requests, but instead of having to re-log in and reestablish our connection every time with the server, we are given a continuous experience in our Twitter or our Instagram feed where we remain uninterrupted, right? So let's take a look at some of the techniques that have been used or that are used to simulate stateful experiences when it comes to this different web applications. One of the ways to achieve statefulness is by using the concept of session identifier. Session identifier or session IDs are basically unique tokens that are sent by the server to the client whenever the client makes its first request to the server. So let's see how that works. The client, excuse me, the client makes its request to the server. The server, having received this request, checks whether this client has any past session ID or not. If the server realizes that this client is a new client which is making its first request, what it does is it sends the response message along with a unique token. The client, having received this token, while making any new request, appends this token along with its request message. So when the server receives this token along with the request message, it knows that, oh, okay, this is a client that I have already served in the past, and I can identify him by using this token. So if the server can correctly identify the client using that token, what it does is it extracts the necessary information that is related to the client from the backend database and sends it back to the client along with any new information that the client has requested. So for example, imagine that I am using Facebook. Okay, I have logged into Facebook, so this is essentially my first request to the Facebook server. So seeing that this is my first request to the server, what the Facebook server does is it generates a token and assigns this token to its first response message, and it sends back to me. So now I am scrolling through my newsfeed and I see a post that I like. So that post already has 20 likes. I gave it another like, so it should have 21 likes now, right? So whenever I hit the like button on that post, that counts as a new request that is being made from the client side, that is from me, and that request is sent to the server. The server checks this request and says that, oh, this request has a session ID attached to it. Let me see which user is identified by the session ID. So the server says that, okay, Anas has hit like to this particular post, and it already has 20 likes. So all I have to do is just increment this count of likes by 1. That is, it will have 21 likes now, and just send this information back to Anas again. So essentially what the server does is it increments that value of likes by 1, and it sends back the information that it has accumulated from this, that is, it generates the required HTML web page and sends it back to me as the response message. Now on my side, the web browser that I am using takes the body of this request message, transforms it into the beautiful modern web page that we see on Facebook nowadays, and it shows me that, okay, my like has been registered, and the post that I was just seeing has 21 likes instead of 20 likes now. So all this is handled by the server while I simply just press a button, right? So to summarize, the way this session handling by using session identifier works is that first, the statefulness is achieved by having the server send some form of a unique token back to the client on its first request. This token is called the session identifier or session ID. For each new subsequent request that the client makes, the client appends this token to its request message, allowing the server to identify it. The server checks every request message to see if it contains a session ID or not. If the request message does indeed have a session ID, the server checks if that session ID is valid or not. If it is valid, the server retrieves session data based on the session ID. And finally, it creates the application state, that is, it creates the HTML web page for a web request and sends it back to the client as the response. And the client, being a web browser, just simply renders that HTML web page and shows it to the user. So that is basically how session identifiers work. One very important thing to remember when it comes to session identifiers is that while session identifiers do give us the stateful experiences when we are using any web application, each of the individual requests that are made from the client are still independent of each other. That is, they are not aware of any previous requests that were made. The only reason we can have this stateful experience is because the session ID that is present in the request and response messages can be used to map to an already existing information in the server database, which is sent back to the client by the server. If there were no session ID, this would not have been possible, right? So the request and responses are completely unaware of any previous exchange of information, and so HTTP is still a stateless protocol. However, HTTP does give the opportunity to have stateful sessions. Okay. So in the backend, the server employs various complex techniques to optimize this session management, and this complex session management techniques are outside the scope of our syllabus. However, we will be taking a look at the most common way of handling sessions or session IDs, which is known as browser cookies. So let's take a look. A cookie is a piece of data that is sent from the server and stored in the client during a request response cycle. Cookies, or HTTP cookies as they are sometimes called, are small files that are stored in the browser and contain the session information. Do not confuse this session information with state information. This session information is only used to identify the client. The actual data related to a session is stored on the server database. The client-side cookie is compared to the server-side session information on each request to identify the current session. Thus, if they are correctly identified, the session will be recognized because of the information that has been associated with that specific cookie. So let's see an actual implementation of this cookie in our web browser. For our example, we will be using Microsoft Edge, which is actually a pretty good browser, and everyone should actually start using it. So what you're going to want to do is open the More Tools option of your browser and go to Developer Tools. After you go to your Developer Tools, go to the Network tab in this specific window. After going to this tab, you will see that we do not have much information here since we have not visited any website yet. So now what we're going to do is we are going to enter a website in our URL bar. We can use any website, but for this example, we will be using the website for Facebook. So after going to Facebook's website, you see that a lot of information has been generated under the network bar, under the network tab, sorry. So you see that a lot of requests have been generated here, 96 requests in total. So whenever we hit any URL, a lot of requests are generated automatically by the web browser because a lot of information needs to be extracted, like this Facebook logo, for example, or the background image of a web page. So a lot of this information needs to be extracted, and so multiple requests have to be made. However, the request that we manually make is enter the website or enter the URL in our URL bar. So what we will do is we will click on this request that we made, that is enter the www.facebook.com URL on our web page, and we will see the information that is related to it. So after clicking on this request that we made, we see that we have some information like headers, preview, response, initiator, timing, and cookies. For now, let's look at the headers tab. So under the headers tab, you see that we have three kinds of information: general, response headers, and request headers. First, let's take a look at the request headers that have been generated when we first hit this www.facebook.com URL. All right, so under our request headers, you see that we have generated, or our browser has generated, a lot of request headers, right? Authority, method, path, scheme, accept, and so on. But one thing you'll notice is among these headers, we do not have any header that is related to cookie, do we? We do not have any header here that corresponds to cookie information. Now recall that whenever we make our initial request, we do not have any cookie information or session information in our request message. So since this is our initial request, our theory was correct, right? Our request message does not have any cookie information. Now, let's take a look at the response header, and this response header should theoretically have this cookie information because if you remember, for the initial request, the server sends back a cookie information or a session information along with its response message, right? So let's take a look at that. All right, so now we are taking a look at our response headers, and among these headers, you see that we do indeed have a cookie header, right? So this cookie header stores some information that can be used to identify that client, and this header is sent back to the client for its first request, right? So now the client has a cookie that it will be sending for its next subsequent requests. So what we will do is we will simply reload this page, which will basically count as another request to the server, and then we will check the message headers or the request headers that have been generated for that request. Okay, so let's reload this page. All right, so we have reloaded this page, and now under the request headers, if we check, we have a new header called cookie. And if you have been performing this experiment on your own as we go through this video, you will see that the value of this cookie matches the value of the set cookie header that we just saw in our previous response header. Okay, so we can understand that for our subsequent requests, this cookie information is being stored in the request is being stored as a request header in our request message. Okay. Now the question is, how does a website know that we are logged in, or how does it verify our authentication? So for this, we will be using another example. Now go to your application tab instead of your network tab, and after hitting this application tab, we will be given this following window. So you see that we have a couple of options here like manifest, service workers, clear storage, and so on. But what we're interested in is this cookies that is stored under storage. So for now, we do not have any website visited, so we do not have any cookie information. But for this example, we will be visiting the Reddit website, and we will check how this cookies help in user authentication. So let's visit Reddit. All right, so we have visited Reddit, and as you can see, we are not currently logged in, right? But under the cookies section, if we check the cookies for this Reddit web page, you will see that there are a couple of cookies that have already been registered. Now, among these cookies, we do not have any cookie named Reddit session or something like that. So that basically signifies that we have not logged into the web page yet. So let's try logging in now and see if we get any new cookie related to our login information. So yeah, this is the website that we are visiting. All right, so right now we are logged in, as you can see. And now, if you notice, we have a new header, or sorry, a new cookie called Reddit session, which is basically storing our login information. So whenever we are browsing Reddit right now, after logging in, each interaction that we perform will be regarded as a new request that is being made by the client to the server. And in that request, we have a cookie header where this information, this Reddit session cookie header information, is being sent to the server. So the server, after receiving this Reddit session header, can verify that, okay, this user is already logged in, and so I can show him the information that he is wanting to see. So if you want, you can try deleting this Reddit session cookie and see what happens. So by deleting this cookie, you will see that upon your next interaction, you will be logged out of Reddit. So essentially, deleting this Reddit session cookie is basically equivalent to logging out of your Reddit account. Okay? So yeah, that is it for today's lecture. We saw a couple of very interesting things today, and hopefully you were able to understand everything that we have discussed in this lecture. And as usual, if there is anything that you have any confusion about, do not hesitate to leave a question down in the comment section, or you can ask me those questions in our next live class. So I'll see you in the next lecture. Till then, stay safe and take care.